Okay, so this is Fireflower by Joseph Bradshire, and that's me. Quit messing with it, Charlotte. You'll end up with a limp just like last year. That was 3 years ago, and I'm not messing with it. It itches. Carol was always giving advice, like a wizened grandmother. She meant well, but she could be tiring. They were basically the same age by years, but that was easy to forget when Charlotte looked like a teenager. Charlotte reached down and scratched her ankle. Her foot was still attached to the ground, firmly rooted. It was the same every year. One foot was always slow to grow, and the itching was barely tolerable. Let it grow. You'll be walking around by tomorrow morning, no problem. I'll make carrot stew tonight, and it will be ready for your breakfast tomorrow to celebrate. Carol bent over to pull some carrots. She was getting on in years, and Charlotte could tell the bending wasn't as easy as it was last spring. Charlotte would be out of the ground soon enough, though, and would be able to take on the bulk of the work. The carrots were a little small this early in the year, not quite ready to be pulled, but even with poor ingredients, Carol's carrot stew would be magnificent, as always. Well, the sun's going down, Carol said. Tomorrow will be a big day for you, running around like a fool. I'm tired just thinking about it. I suggest we get some sleep. Carol tottered off with her cane and carrots, while Charlotte folded herself into the ground, appearing to the world like a small garden bush in the fading light. Down the path from Carol's hut, out in the brush and trees, beyond the reach of the light and the cooking fire, 4 men watched and whispered. It's just the old lady. Been watching since yesterday. There's no one else here. Are you sure it's the right place? It has to be. Right up next to the cinder cliffs. Stone hut, large garden in the back. There's no one else for half a day's walk in any direction. Ulrich will be furious. He wants them both, the witch and the girl. Well, let's grab her and see what she says. With barely a nod of acknowledgement, the 4 men slipped out of the brush and onto the path leading to the front door. Silent, covered in soot from the numerous burns around cinder cliffs, they were all but invisible. Even their blades had been covered black. Seaver, the scout, the smallest, stayed back while the largest of them, Gar, took the center. With a nod to either side, Gard rushed the door of the hut, smashing it off its hinges, splinters flying in all directions. The other 2, the Blackridge brothers, were right behind him, spreading out into the hut in opposite directions. Carol hadn't gone to bed yet. She was still sitting over the carrot stew, singing to herself. Too startled to cry out, Carol didn't get a chance to make a sound before being cuffed in the head. She was tied, gagged, and carried away out into the darkness. The men stayed just long enough for Seaver the scout to run the perimeter of the property, brushing past the sleeping Charlotte on the way. With that complete, the 4 men, with Gar carrying Carol over his shoulder, moved down the path into darkness. Charlotte woke up with a yawn, stretching up towards the sun, unfolding herself. Her foot was still rooted, and it still itched. Maybe another day of growing, then? She had been hoping to walk a bit that day. She reminded herself to be patient. Carol, she called out, this foot, it's still not ready. Does that mean no carrot stew? Carol wouldn't let the stew go to waste. Charlotte's mouth was already watering. Carol, there was no response. That was odd. Carol was usually up well before Charlotte. In the spring, she was always up first. Carol, Charlotte yelled, and waited, listening. She heard nothing. She listened to the trees, the grass. Still nothing. Carol, I'm about to come looking for you. If you're out in the woods picking flowers or something, I swear I'm going to explode. Charlotte started wrenching her foot, still rooted in the ground. Giving it a hard twist and a pull, it was almost ready anyway, so it came out with little effort. It hurt, though, and was a bit small to put full weight on. No matter, Charlotte limped as fast as she could around the hut to the front door. Smashed to bits, and no Carol. Carrot stew still sitting on the fire. Charlotte reached out with her eyes and ears, reached out with her heart, touching every tree and blade of grass in the Cinder Cliff area. She touched them, and they touched back. Men had come through the brush and waited, then left with Carol. She limped over to where the men had waited and watched. In the darkness, the grass there was smashed and complaining. Charlotte looked down the trail, the only way in or out. It wasn't hard to know which direction the men had gone. She couldn't see any blood, and the grass along the trail had tasted none. No graves had been dug, no bodies pressing down the grass or bushes, at least not for a few miles. Carol was still alive, hopefully. Charlotte reached up to grasp a tree limb. It broke off easily in her hands, the perfect size walking stick. The grass at her feet swirled around her to create a passable dress. Lamenting the wasted carrot stew and her empty stomach, Charlotte delayed no further. She limped down the road as fast as she could, as her new feet would take her. It was full light out, and Carol couldn't see that much through the sack over her head. Probably midday, judging by the heat on her back. She tried to yell some profanities, but it came out garbled. She was gagged with what tasted like an old sock. Carol started kicking. If a man was going to carry her out of her home, she didn't have to make it easy for him. She squirmed and rolled and kicked like a deer until finally she was set down hard upon the grass. Her sack was removed. She blinked in the daylight. "Stupid old woman. Do you want another cuff?" It was Gar, the big one. He raised his hand to accentuate the threat. Carol responded with fervor, but words were muffled by the gag. Gar turned to the rest of his men. "That's enough walking for now. Let's rest a bit here. We need to talk to the old lady anyway." The smaller men collected water skins and ran off in the direction of a creek. It looked like Cinder Creek, so they weren't that far from home. Gar bent over and removed Carol's gag. Before Gar could speak, Carol started. "What is this, beast? Stealing a woman from the woods? What you want of me?" "You are the witch of the Cinder Cliffs," Gar said. "I've captured you for Oldrich. Where is your daughter? We were told there was a girl." The other two men, who looked like brothers, shifted and grinned at the mention of a girl. Sleaze. One of them even took a glance at her in an unfriendly way. Gar gave him a hard look, and he suddenly had other things to look at, the sky, the trees. But the expression on his face remained, a half-smile that didn't extend to his dead eyes. The small one arrived with the skins filled and sat down. The pause gave Carol time to think. "Charlotte, my daughter, died in a fire last fall. She lied. Sort of." "The Cinder Cliffs," Gar said, "are protected by the fire demon. Your daughter burns, yet you live there unharmed? How is this possible?" "Demons? Those are children's stories," Carol said. "I'm surprised a grown man would believe in such things." Gar stood up. "No matter. Oldrich and his joint stretcher will get the truth from you. Enough rest. I'd like to be out of sight of the Cinder Cliffs before we make camp." Gar picked Carol up off the grass by the shoulders, setting her on her feet. "Walk," he barked. Carol walked, as slow as she could manage, missing her cane. Charlotte knew she was close. It was getting too dark to see, but she could smell the stench of man warring with the sweet scent of spring flowers. A tree had cried out an hour earlier, frightened by the appearance of fire. If Charlotte was right, the men had stopped to make camp and a cooking fire. An open fire, cocky. Their hubris would be her advantage. Charlotte's foot pained her. She pushed a fast pace all day. It was starting to bleed a little now, but no matter. It would bark over and heal overnight. And the pain was worth it. She found the men's camp. Abandoning the trail, she moved through the brush and trees with the silence no other being could match. Approaching the fire, she could see 3 men cooking, laying back, eating and belching. Disgusting. On the fire was the half-eaten carcass of something, maybe a small pig. It was hard to tell. Charlotte fought off the urge to gag. She was not used to slaughtered animals. She made a mental note, adding hunting to the list of crimes she was going to punish these men for. With the thought, her walking stick sharpened itself at both ends. She moved around to the back of the big man. The big ones are usually in charge. and prepared to shove her spear through his throat. She was tackled to the ground. A fourth man, not as big as the others, had been waiting in ambush. She turned to fight, but was clubbed in the head hard. She didn't lose consciousness, but the fight left her. The small one dragged her toward the fire, where the others tied her, setting her down near Carol. "It's good to see you," Carol said. "Yes, you too. Sorry I got caught." Carol smiled at Charlotte, and Charlotte grinned back. Seaver, the scout, was roundly cheered by his companions for catching the girl. The Black Ridge brothers were elated, and not for good reasons. Seaver had never traveled with them before, but he knew the type. Gar did as well, as he made his bed nearest to the captive women, meaning to protect them overnight. He ordered the brothers to sleep up the trail, furthest from the women. There was something about these two ladies. They knew each other, that was for certain, but there was something else, a calm. A normal woman would be screaming by this point, weeping. These two showed no signs of terror. Also, the grass skirt, the hobbled foot, the way the young one moved so smoothly through the forest, it was eerie, smacked of magic. Seaver, usually the cool-headed one, was ill at ease. "Gar," he said, "these women, something's not right. They aren't scared." "Who knows with women? Don't try to understand them," Gar said, laying down to sleep. Gar was snoring soon after. Seaver sat for a while watching the women. They whispered to each other, calm, like old friends chatting about the weather. Knowing he wouldn't sleep any time soon, Seaver jogged off into the night to do some forward scouting down the trail. Carol watched the young man jog off into the darkness, in the right direction, and sighed. "I wish we had a few more days. I'll miss you," Carol said. "You'll miss me doing the berry picking, that's what you'll miss." Charlotte laughed, and Carol joined in a moment later. "So," Carol said, "should we get to it?" "Yes, I can't think of a reason to delay. I'd love to sit and chat all night, but who knows when we'll get another chance." Carol felt blades of grass crawling over her wrists and ankle, sawing at her bonds. The heathens had bound her with thick horsehide, but horsehide could be cut by razor grass as easy as anything else. Soon they were both freed. "Ready?" Charlotte asked. "Yes." Charlotte stood up and screamed, running down the trail towards the brothers. Gar's snoring stopped with a choke, and he got up and ran after her. They all tackled her more or less simultaneously. Charlotte fought them, kicking and biting. It took all three of them to hold her down. Then the scout arrived with the rope, wrapping it around her feet, making it tight. Carol got up and ran in the opposite direction, up the trail towards home. She turned to wave at her friend, the best friend she'd ever had, the only friend. Charlotte waved back and smiled, while the men held her down. Then she ignited. A pillar of fire burst from her chest into the air, lashing out in all directions. The men were caught in it, their greasy hair and clothing catching quickly. Gar tried to run, burning but still alive. Fire licked out and engulfed him. Carol turned away. She couldn't see through the tears anyway. She searched around for a good walking stick, found one, and began the slow track back towards the Cinder Cliffs and home. The following winter had been mild, and spring had come early. Carol was glad at that. She spent every second she could in the garden. It had been sunny for a week straight, very exciting. Today could be the big day. She woke up with first light and rushed around the house to the garden. She didn't want to get her hopes up too much. She might have to wait another week or two. It's hard to tell with gardens. As she opened the squeaky gate to step through, she heard it. "Carol, is that you? Ugh, I'm so dry. Can you get me some water? My hands are still stuck, so I can't reach." Carol's eyes welled up with happy tears. Yes, always with the complaining with you, isn't it? Quiet, you, or the demon of the Cinder Cliffs will come get you." They both had a good laugh at that, and many more laughs, sitting in the garden, watching the sunrise. The end.